There is a number that explains everything happening right now in the Middle East. Not the number of airstrikes on Tehran, not the Iranian casualties, not the ships sunk in the Strait of Hormuz. The number is 221. That is the total size of the entire United States Air Force C-17 Globemaster III fleet. Every strategic airlifter the United States owns. Every aircraft capable of moving tanks, artillery, special operations forces. UN combat equipment from the continental United States to a forward theater in under 18 hours. In a 2-week window beginning in late January 2026, open-source flight tracking analysts confirmed that 163 of those 221 aircraft, 74% of the entire U.S. strategic airlift fleet, had conducted active missions toward the Middle East. Do the math. When the United States moves 74% of its entire airlift capacity in one direction, it is not reinforcing a garrison. It is not rotating personnel. It is not conducting a scheduled exercise. It is building something. And whatever it is building is going to need all of that. The C-17 Globemaster III is not a transport aircraft in the way most people understand transport aircraft. Length, 53 meters. Wingspan, 51.7 meters. Maximum payload, 77,519 kilograms. Range with full combat load, 4,630 kilometers. It can land on a runway 915 meters long, less than the length of 10 American football fields, which means it can deliver a 77-ton payload to an airstrip that conventional cargo aircraft cannot approach. It can airdrop 102 paratroopers simultaneously from 1,500 feet. It can carry an M1A2 Abrams main battle tank, all 62 tons of it, ready to drive off the ramp directly into combat operations. The C-17 does not need a port. It does not need a rail line. It does not need 3 weeks of pre-positioning. It needs a runway and an air corridor, and it will put your entire division's worth of equipment on the ground in a foreign theater before the enemy's intelligence apparatus has fully processed what is happening. That is not an accident of engineering. That is a deliberate capability gap the United States built into its force structure after 1991. When the lesson of Desert Shield was written in 6 months of agonizing prepositioning. Never again wait for ships when aircraft can move faster. Iran has no equivalent. Iran has no strategic airlift. Iran cannot project combined arms forces beyond its borders at speed. When Iran wants to move military capability, it uses trucks. It uses ships. It uses proxy networks that take weeks to activate. When the United States wants to move military capability, it calls for 163 C-17s, and the equipment is wheels down in theater before the next news cycle. Flight tracking data and open-source intelligence confirmed the units moving through RAF Fairford and RAF Mildenhall in the United Kingdom, through Ramstein Air Base in Germany, through Camp Arifjan in Kuwait, the primary logistics hub for the entire theater. The 75th Ranger Regiment, the most rapidly deployable direct action force in the U.S. Army. It's 18 hours from alert to wheels up anywhere on Earth, trained specifically for short-notice contingency operations. Seizure of airfields, capture or elimination of high-value targets, forced entry operations into denied territory. Elements of the 101st Airborne Division, Air Assault. The division that took Baghdad's outskirts in 2003, that held positions in Afghanistan when no other force could access the terrain. Capable of inserting an entire brigade by helicopter into an objective area with no ground lines of communication required. The 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. The helicopter pilots who fly the aircraft that insert the teams that execute the missions that never appear in official press releases. Their aircraft, MH-60M Black Hawks modified for long-range low observable infiltration. ZOIS H-47G Chinooks capable of carrying 33 fully equipped special operators at 315 kilometers per hour in complete radar silence. These are not garrison forces. These are not headquarters battalions or logistics support units or military police. These are the people the United States sends when it has decided that something specific needs to happen, at a time and place of American choosing. And they all arrived together, in a 2-week window, on 163 C-17s. On January 12, 2026, a new command node went operational at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. The Middle East Air Defense Combined Defense Operations Center, MEAD-CDOC, a coordination cell integrating missile defense operations across 17 nations simultaneously, real-time sensor sharing, real-time intercept coordination, every Patriot battery, every THAAD system, every naval SM-3 launcher in the theater feeding targeting data into a single picture. Iran's intelligence services understood what that meant before the press release was published. It meant the United States was no longer protecting individual bases. It was covering the entire theater with an integrated kill web that treated every Iranian missile launch, regardless of its intended target, as a problem to be solved by whichever platform had the best shot. Satellite imagery in early February showed Iranian missile batteries moving into hardened positions near the Zagros Mountains, surface-to-air units repositioning, underground facilities receiving additional resupply convoys. Iran was not preparing to attack. Iran was preparing to absorb, because Iranian planners had run the same numbers that every analyst in Washington was running. 163 C-17s, 77,500, 19 kilograms per aircraft. Multiply those two numbers. Do the math. That is 12.6 million kilograms of military payload delivered to forward bases in a 2-week window. 12,500 tons of equipment, ammunition, vehicles, and personnel before a single U.S. Navy vessel fired a shot, before a single Israeli aircraft crossed the Iranian border, before Operation Epic Fury had a name. Iran wasn't looking at an American military that was considering action. Iran was looking at an American military that had already decided and was simply finishing the loading process. The first Iranian official to use the word panic in a communications intercept reviewed by CENTCOM did so on February 19th, 9 days before the first missile struck Tehran. The C-17 missions that landed at Camp Arifjan in Kuwait and Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE in the final week of February were not carrying additional infantry. The infantry was already positioned. The final wave was carrying something quieter. Electronic warfare systems, signals intelligence packages, mobile command and control nodes capable of operating independently if the primary theater communications architecture was degraded, medical evacuation infrastructure, forward surgical teams, blood supply chains, trauma capabilities scaled for a sustained operation rather than a single night's strikes. That last category is the one military planners read most carefully. You deploy forward surgical teams when you are planning for American casualties. You scale blood supply when you believe the operation will last longer than 72 hours. The C-17 that landed in the final week were telling anyone who could read logistics the same thing. This is not a strike. This is a campaign. At 0600 hours on February 28th, the first Israeli missiles entered Iranian airspace. U.S. carrier aircraft from Abraham Lincoln and Gerald R. Ford was simultaneously on station. The Ranger battalions that had arrived on C-17s 6 weeks earlier were at their forward operating positions, fully equipped, waiting. They had been waiting, fully equipped, for 17 days. That is what 163 C-17 looks like when the loading is complete. The aircraft have landed, the troops are positioned, the operation is underway. But 3 questions from this deployment have no clean answers. First, the sustainment problem. Deploying 12.5 million kilograms of military payload forward is the beginning of the logistics equation, not the end. Every tank burns 400 liters of fuel per operational hour. Every Ranger battalion consumes approximately 8 tons of food, water, and ammunition daily in sustained operations. The C-17 missions that moved the force forward now have to run continuously just to keep it fed, fueled, and armed. The same 221 aircraft that deployed the force are now the supply line for the force. Yet they cannot do both jobs simultaneously at full capacity. Second, the Iran dispersal problem. Iranian military planners had 6 weeks from the first observed C-17 surge to begin dispersing assets. 6 weeks to move missile systems underground. 6 weeks to relocate high-value command personnel. 6 weeks to activate the one capability that cannot be loaded onto a C-17 and preempted before it moves. The IRGC's proxy network across Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. The 161st SOAR and Ranger battalions are optimized for direct action against fixed targets. Dispersed irregular forces operating through proxy networks across 4 countries are a fundamentally different problem. Third, the timeline question. The scale of this deployment, 74% of total U.S. strategic airlift committed to one theater, is not a posture the United States can maintain indefinitely. Every C-17 flying Kuwait to Arifjan is a C-17 not available for Pacific contingencies. Every Ranger battalion forward deployed to Jordan is a Ranger battalion not available for Taiwan scenarios. CENTCOM has assembled the largest U.S. military force in the Middle East since 2003. The window in which that force is at full effectiveness is measured in weeks, not months. Iran's military planners know this as well as American ones do. Whatever comes next is coming on a timeline defined not by diplomatic negotiations or United Nations resolutions, but by the maintenance cycle of 163 C-17 Globemaster IIIs and the rotation schedules of the battalions they carried. The aircraft have landed. The equipment is forward. The surgical teams are positioned. The clock that matters now is not on any diplomat's desk. Stay vigilant. Stay informed.